She stood near the far end of the train station where the lights flickered like they were tired of trying, clutching her worn jacket tighter around herself as the winter air crept through every crack of the concrete walls, her shoes damp from a long day of walking interviews that led nowhere, her stomach empty except for hope that was slowly thinning, and in her pocket rested her last $10, the final piece of security between her and a long night of hunger, money she had promised herself she would use for bread and a cheap cup of tea before heading to the shelter, when she noticed him sitting on a bench nearby, a stranger with slumped shoulders and eyes fixed on the tracks as if he were waiting for something that might never arrive, his coat old but clean, his hands trembling slightly not from cold alone but from something heavier, something quieter, the kind of weight people carry when life has taught them too many lessons at once, and when their eyes met briefly he looked away in embarrassment, but she caught the hunger there, the same hunger she felt, not just for food but for dignity, for being seen, and she tried to ignore it, told herself she had no room to be a hero, no extra kindness left to give when she herself was running on empty, but fate has a way of tapping the shoulder of those who still believe in goodness, because moments later she heard his soft voice asking no one in particular if anyone knew when the next train was coming, and something about the way he spoke, polite, restrained, as if apologizing for existing, made her heart ache, and before logic could stop her she asked if he was okay, and he hesitated, pride-fighting need, before admitting he hadn't eaten all day and had lost his wallet somewhere between cities, saying it quickly like a confession he wanted over with, assuring her he wasn't asking for money, just information, but she knew that tone, knew that lie people tell when they don't want to be a burden, and her fingers tightened around the $10 bill as her mind raced through consequences, no dinner, a colder night, more discomfort, but then she remembered something her mother once said when they had nothing either, that kindness isn't about having extra, it's about sharing even when it scares you, and before fear could reclaim her she placed the folded bill into his hand, closing his fingers around it gently like it was something fragile, telling him to get food, to please eat something warm, and his eyes widened in shock, confusion, then disbelief, and finally something broke as tears welled up, the kind a man tries to hide after years of teaching himself not to cry, and he tried to refuse, insisted she needed it more, but she smiled and said she'd be okay, even though she had no idea how, and he thanked her over and over, his voice unsteady, promising he'd repay her someday though they both knew they would likely never meet again, and when his train arrived he stood, nodded once with deep respect, and disappeared into the crowd, leaving her alone on the platform with an emptiness in her stomach but a strange warmth in her chest, and that night was harder than usual, hunger sharper, sleep thinner, but she told herself it was worth it, that somewhere a stranger was eating because she chose compassion over fear, and days turned into weeks as life continued its relentless pace, rejection emails piling up, shoes wearing thinner, hope tested daily, until one afternoon she received an unexpected call from a number she didn't recognize, a calm voice on the other end asking if she was the woman who had helped a man at the train station weeks ago, and suspicion flared until he described her jacket, her words, the way she had pressed the money into his hand, and before she could respond he introduced himself, not as a lost traveler, not as a hungry stranger, but as the owner of a transportation logistics firm worth millions, a man who had gone incognito after a burnout, traveling without assistance or status to see how the world treated him without a title, and when his wallet was stolen he chose to accept the situation rather than use his connections, wanting to see what kindness still existed among people who had nothing to gain, and he told her she was the only person who stopped, the only one who gave without asking questions, the only one who treated him like a human being instead of a problem to avoid, and her breath caught as reality settled in, disbelief mixing with awe. And then he said he wanted to repay her kindness not with $10 but with opportunity, offering her a job, housing assistance, and funding to finish the education she had once abandoned to survive, and she cried openly, overwhelmed not just by relief but by the realization that one small act, one terrifying leap of generosity, had altered the course of 2 lives, and months later as she stood in her own apartment, sunlight pouring through clean windows, wearing confidence instead of fear, she understood something powerful, that kindness is never wasted, even when it feels invisible, even when it costs you, because you never know who you're helping, or how far your goodness will travel. And if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that compassion still matters in a world that often feels cold, then subscribe to this channel right now, because every story you hear here is a reminder that small acts can create extraordinary miracles, and you won't want to miss the next one.